Good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are. I'm doing a live stream video, whatever, to whoever eventually will see this. Not as I notice this is not as popular a topic, interestingly enough, about the Epstein, Maxwell, etc. I think of it. By the way, when I think of this, I think of it as called the Epstein-Barr virus. Because the Epstein-Barr virus is this generic virus that makes people sick. Um, and Epstein is Epstein. Barr, I guess, Barr, the former AG, his father was involved with Epstein at some point in time, gave him a job, I think, at a college. Barr was also, I think, the AG when the report was made about Acosta. So Epstein Barr. That's the way I think about it. So what I'm going to talk about today is a little bit the most recent stuff about Maxwell, the my kind of take on Acosta, and a 350-page report, and a talk a little bit about the client list that's been discussed, uh, which is disgusting, but discussed. I'm going to quickly do. I don't like doing jokes on these topics, but I will, just so we have a little baseline of something. How do birds prepare for tests? They don't. They just wing it. And what should we do? This is the second one and most important one. And we probably always, all of us, ponder this. What should we do with all the deadweight people who rely on government handouts but refuse to work? What should we do with all those people? Of course, we should kick them out of Congress. That's the answer. Anyway, so I wanted to talk about. We're going to start off first with the client list. So the you heard originally discussion about, and we're talking about Jeffrey Epstein, Maxwell, all that nonsense. You heard early on about a client list, and obviously I've done work involving client lists because oftentimes in civil litigation, some business sues some other business because they claim that somebody stole their client list. And literally, there will be a client list, a list of clients written down, and that will be a client list. In the Epstein matter, there was, people were asking for a client list. I thought that was a ridiculous ask. Why do I think that was a ridiculous ask? Because a client list, if you're talking about an illegal activity, you can't say somebody's a client unless they've been convicted. So somebody asking for a client list is asking for documents that don't exist. Asking for names that appear in the files is something else. But all the reference to a client list didn't make any sense to me because, of course, there's no client list. There wouldn't be, because that would be defamatory in a way. If you claim somebody had committed an illegal act but hadn't gone prosecuted them, you might be guilty of defamation. So you're not going to say that. Hence, that's why I thought the whole rigmarole about a client list was nonsense. Now there's thousands of documents. One of the things I looked at was the report that was generated, I think, in 2019 about Alex Acosta. And in that report, they literally say, I think, hundreds of thousands of pages. So in the files, that have been discussed, and I think what were discussed with the grand jury testimony, that's just a little smidgen of all the files. There's literally, because that's what it says in the executive summary and in the 350-page report that I just looked at, excluding that 350 page, hundreds of thousands of pages, photos, documents, etc. So when you hear discussion about just the grand jury testimony, you're just talking about a fraction of it, and that only deals with two defendants, not everybody. So lots of stuff out there that hasn't been disclosed, but the names are important, like the client list. Secondarily, Glizane, I'm just going to call her G Maxwell. Easier, easier for me. So yesterday it was announced that she'd been moved from a higher security level prison to a lower security prison camp. So, what does that mean? So I'm sure it could mean lots of things, but what I thought, to me, it could mean, this is what it occurred to me. One, it could mean nothing. Just could have been a schedule. They might have just determined she wasn't a risk. She wasn't dangerous, and they were just going to transfer it. There could be a deal in place where, after their discussion with Todd Blanche, again, pale, very pale, there was some agreement or tacit agreement that she'd be moved, and at some point in time, she'd either provide information, and at some point in time, she would get clemency, or it was an attempt by the administration to influence her to be cooperative by changing her living conditions, or, and the one that's the most, the one that occurred to me also, it's a low-level security place, which means there's a lack of security, and there's a lack of fencing, there's a lack of guards. And if I wanted to threaten someone and it appeared I was making their life easier, but I was exposing them to danger to get them to act, that might be another reason why you would reduce them to a lower level security ranch, as it's called. I don't know which one of that is, but I found it interesting. And again, if in fact at some point in time there is one, I wouldn't believe Maxwell for no matter what she says at this point in time. She is, she was a conspiracy to commit pedophilia. She's a scumbag. She deserves to rot in jail. She was also charged with perjury that they eventually dropped just out of convenience, but not because she wasn't guilty of it. And if in fact she gets clemency or a pardon, that, to me, that is more reason to not doubt, but disbelieve this complete sociopathic, psychotic scumbag who assisted Epstein in, in essence, damaging young girls. Disgusting. So rot in jail. I don't mind if she doesn't serve out, if she ends up not being able to serve out her sentence because of natural causes, it's fine with me. Planet doesn't need her. She's a scumbag. But if in fact she changes her story or doesn't change her story, either one, because it may be that she doesn't speak. That's the deal. She doesn't say anything, and then she gets clemency. But if I see her get clemency and or pardon, that would mean the administration is supporting in this case, is supporting someone who conspired to commit pedophilia. And that should say enough. I mean, is there anything more I have to say? So if I see a pardon or a clemency, my conclusion is the people that provided that are supporting pedophilia and are disgusting pigs. And again, I don't care what comes out in this. Whoever it gets implicated in this, whenever, because eventually I could, so far the energy is up. One of the reasons I'm doing these is to keep the energy up. Just like, to me, it's like a guy like Reichman and GTII, for those of you who might know that, at some point in time, you kind of know something's up and you just got to pursue it. And if someone tells you not to pursue it, what do you think you're going to do? You're just going to drop it. So I don't really care who's responsible, who's involved, what party, what not party, what race, what religion. They all should be exposed. And if they have nothing to hide, if they're just associates and it was just a bad choice, then fine. But if they were scumbag criminals, they should be exposed for what they are. So that's my basic premise. So with that, part 3. I was wondering about Alex Acosta. I had Spencer Kuvin on, the attorney who represented a bunch of victims and the first victim. And we were talking about Alex Acosta, because Alex Acosta was the gentleman, I use that term very gingerly, who made the decision about the plea agreement and the non-prosecution agreement that was entered into, I think, 2008. In that agreement, Epstein ended up an 18-month prison sentence. He had to pay some compensation out of his wealth that he acquired by some means. He had to register as a sex offender. I think those were the grounds. But any of his I think there were 4 assistants that were involved in some fashion, they were let off. And anybody not named who eventually, I guess, could be considered a co-conspirator was let off. So anybody who perpetrated any kind of crime basically was let off, other than Epstein, who got a very minor sentence, and we'll get to that. So what happens is, I think in my reading of the events is 1995, there's a pair of girls that make a complaint. Same thing. I think the general thing is they go in for a massage, or they're asked to go in to give a massage, and it turns. They get paid some money. The money's a lot to them. Most of them were one time deals. Some ended up doing it multiple times for the money. Some became recruiters. Some were only recruiters. This happened mostly in Palm Beach Island, where I've never been, or in Manhattan or the Virgin Islands. And as to Palm Beach, the island, houses are together. So if you're the neighbor, you would know, and Epstein's reputation was well known at the time. You would know that there was a party, and you would see the people that would come, and you kind of know that was going on. Anyway, 2005, parents of a 15-year-old make a complaint to the Palm Beach Police Department about what I just mentioned. An investigation ensues. There's multiple victims that come forward. The state starts prosecuting, but they are, for whatever reason, even though there's multiple victims and seems to be a story that's consistent, the state is reluctant to prosecute. So they take it to a grand jury, but instead of seeking all the charges that apply, they sought the most weak charges. And the police, I think it was the police, or I don't know if it was the FBI independently, felt that the state wasn't taking it seriously enough, and there was serious misconduct involving these super wealthy people, etc., on Palm Beach Island. So the cops went to the FBI. The FBI started an investigation. The feds got involved. The feds started to investigate. They were interested not only because of the crimes, and they had to figure out, make them state crimes, which either would be, sex trafficking, which at the time was fairly new, or doing things across state lines. But they went in there with the kind of, based upon their knowledge, reviewing documents, speaking to witnesses, that the state was kind of taking a very hands-off approach for no particular reason, even though they stated, they made up some reasons, but there really wasn't a good reason why they were being so lenient. At least wasn't a disclosed reason. Anyway, there were some feds that got involved and prosecutors, and they put together a case. And eventually a 60-count indictment was put together, along with a memorandum of facts supporting all the claims, etc. That was like 80 pages long, that was submitted to up the chain of command. Eventually moves up to Alex Acosta, who makes the final decision in that particular district. And it took many, many months for whatever reason for him to review that information. Before they made that decision, and I think Mr. Kuvan spoke about it, there were computers and cameras in all these facilities, and the computers and cameras monitored the events that were occurring. And I think Mr. Kuvan suggested that when he went in on the inspection on the Palm Beach property in the last live stream I did. He saw a bunch of camera mounts that were empty. So brings us to this. So when they decided to prosecute, they went in and they noticed that the cameras and computers were all gone. So when the feds took over, they started to pursue those computers and cameras. While the pursuit of those computers and cameras were ongoing, the legal team for Epstein jumped in. That's Dershowitz, Roy Black, a really high-powered, aggressive legal team. And they first tried to convince the prosecutors not to prosecute, then not to do state charges, not to do federal charges, to let him out, not to sign up as a sex offender, etc. But they used a lot of time. And I think Mr. Kuvan said that the victims during that time were chased around and followed and harassed. And I think that's what he said, that was believed from the Epstein clan, who had all kinds of money to spend and obviously had a lot to lose, and they were chasing them around. So all this computer equipment, including personal computers and camera equipment, was missing. The feds started to go after it. This is when the attorneys jumped in, and then negotiations start. Now, a lot of the feds and the police department didn't think the negotiations should go forward at all. They thought it should be prosecuted. But it went forward anyway. And originally it started off, and so it went forward without having access to the computers, which are thought to have contained pictures and videos, including of minors, and videotapes, which were used to watch everybody that was coming in and not coming out. There was no real good reason offered as to why they didn't wait, but they didn't wait. So they engaged in negotiations without that very important information. The defense attorneys pressured them. Acosta just didn't seem to be super competent. The police were pissed that things weren't being pressed as much. The FBI and some of the members of the federal prosecutors were interested in pushing this. And if the federal charges were pursued and they prevailed, the sentence could have been up to 20 years in the federal pen. But for various reasons, and there were reasons stated, Acosta decided, without looking at the computer information, without looking at the cameras, decided that doing a plea deal and not taking the risk or incurring the expense of the prosecution was a better idea. And so they set a minimum standard of 24 months, plus a fund to pay the victims, plus he'd have to register as a sex offender, plus everybody else would get off, no pun intended. Everybody else would be excused from prosecution, wouldn't have to deal with anything. That was kind of the deal. But the minimum floor was 24 months. And there certainly was an agreement, but Acosta was the final sign-off. And during the course of the litigations, not only did the attorneys for Epstein press and follow witnesses and victims around, but they also apparently created conflict. So what they would do is, if there was a certain attorney that was involved for the government, they might hire as an attorney representing Epstein someone who had a direct relationship with that person and might require the government attorney to step down. And that happened. I know it happened at least once with a major attorney, probably happened more than that. But it seems like counsel for Epstein, consistent with Epstein, engage in all kinds of shenanigans to try to intimidate, gain an advantage, etc. But notwithstanding that, and without ever giving a reason, Acosta negotiated. He started with that 24-month minimum. He never gave a reason or explanation for that minimum. And, when he was interviewed, it was like 15 years after the fact, but no explanation, no idea. Negotiations were ongoing and continued. The Epstein Council kept on pressing. Eventually, that 24-month deal that was the minimum turned into an 18-month deal, even though the agreement was he had to serve it completely in jail. And originally it was going to be a state facility. It ended up being a county jail, and he ended up being in a separate facility. But originally he was going to stay there full time. But in the end, he only had to stay there at nights. It was like, if you ever watch Mayberry RFD, Otis the drunk, he comes back and puts himself in the cell at night. Epstein was out. One time, apparently, he was caught walking on the beach. He was released on work release. One time, he was caught by the police on the beach, like 8 miles away from where he was supposed to be. He BS'd some story. But he didn't seem to, even when he was on work release, he seemed to kind of thumb his nose at his sentence. There was no explanation why there would be no prosecution, a non-prosecution agreement. Why should the 4 assistants who were involved in soliciting victims, why should anybody else who was involved in pedophilia be excused for their misconduct, especially the ones that aren't even named? Made no sense. He offered no explanation. Epstein, as I said, originally the minimum was 24 months. It ended up being 18 months. He served 13, and again, work release was most of his time. Some apparently at his attorney's office where he ran apparently some bogus company. And during these proceedings or thereafter, it was when Maxwell was charged with perjury for lying during a deposition. I think that was it. So what happened was there was a review of Acosta. What did you do? What you did here, was it appropriate? But what they looked at, it's the Office of Professional Responsibility of the U.S. Attorney's Office. They were looking to see if he violated these clear established standards of professional conduct. So they were looking for clear things like, for example, because they didn't speak to the victims after the deal was struck. And there's a law that requires them. So does not speaking to the victims, is that a violation that requires that is punishable? They said no. Does entering in this agreement without knowing what you were doing, is that punishable? No. And then in the end, what they determined is nothing that he did violated his ethical obligations. However, he exercised extremely bad judgment. And that included in part by, without explanation, giving a complete immunity to everyone involved, including those who were not named. And that's one of the bases, by the way, of appeal of Ghislaine Maxwell. She thinks that she was immunized in that agreement too. And one of the errors, I'm putting that in quotation marks, that Acosta made was by, for no reason, putting in there. For no reason, he forgot to put in also that Epstein couldn't get on a work release and that he couldn't go to a city prison, city jail, and make it up for he had. So, and all this arose, by the way, after the Miami Herald raised this issue. And their issue they raised is, what's the deal with this ridiculous plea agreement that was entered into way back in 2007, 2008. And the story came out in 2018. And they tried to figure out, why did Acosta enter into this agreement? And they made, obviously it's a ridiculous agreement. Epstein pulled one over on them. I don't know why the state went light. It makes me concerned about the state officials that were involved in making those original decisions. Have they been investigated? If not, why not? Acosta, why hasn't he not been called to Congress? Why has he not been questioned? I've seen his mealy-mouthed explanation where the volume goes down. I've never seen him give a coherent response. And it wasn't just bad judgment. I'd like to see him explain his decision to give a 2-year sentence and his decision to let everyone else off the hook. I'd also like an explanation as to why there was no discussion with neighbors, why neighbors weren't put under, for deposition. I didn't hear anything from the cops. What happened to the hundreds of thousands of pages of case files? I heard Pamela Biondi, the AG, speak, and she said, I think at some point in time when she was asked about this, she referred to the file on her desk. That's ludicrous. Maybe there's a memo on her desk, but if there's hundreds of thousands of pages, computers, photos, as referenced by the Fed's own documents, it couldn't have been in front of her. She couldn't have seen it. She can't be aware of all the information. She obviously hasn't studied it. Acosta didn't even look at it. So how could she have? So it's a ridiculous statement and nonsense. And it's not been disclosed. And there is an attempt to suppress it. And I'm not even accusing anybody of committing misconduct. The only one I'm accusing so far of committing misconduct are Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, his solicitor of criminal misconduct. I'm not claiming, for example, that Trump has any, other than, let me put it this way, exercise extremely poor judgment in engaging with a pedophile. Let's say it that. Beyond that, I can't comment. But there's others that this conduct probably went beyond that. And does anybody in that situation deserve protection from public disclosure? I mean, if you diddle around with little kids, should you be protected from disclosure? So my view is the reason why the government doesn't want to disclose the names and the files is because there's other people on there who either are super influential, super financially wealthy, parts of governments, etc. And that's why I believe that the files and names of the people that associated with Epstein, other than the victims, is being withheld. And until that information and names are disclosed, I'm going to continue to call for it. There's no reason not to. There is absolutely no reason to not disclose the names of the people that are referenced in the files other than the victims. And if somebody has a problem with their name being disclosed, then go into court. So, I've seen names like Bill Clinton, whatever, referenced, and Trump. And if they don't want their name disclosed, then go into court and get some kind of protective order. Otherwise, there's no reason not to have the public hear your explanation why you frequently socialized with a scumbag pedophilia specialist. I don't even know what the name to call him. Anyway, so with that, I've read the report. The report was 350 pages on Acosta, mostly saying he didn't violate this standard, he didn't violate this standard, but there's no information to support his activities, the sentence, or anything. But despite that, we're not going to hold him accountable. That was the conclusion. That's summing up 350 pages. So with that, don't let this story die. Keep on top of it. If someone tells you not to look into it, look into it. And again, I'm not throwing water on anybody who is frequented with, engaged with, socialized with Epstein on multiple occasions, certainly after he was known to be during these time frame, 1995 through 2019. I want to hear your explanation and your excuse, especially if you lived in Palm Beach. Anyway, enough babbling on. Thanks for being here. Thanks for hanging out. Please comment, subscribe, share. Please share. I'd appreciate that. If you have any comments, I will certainly look at them, and appreciate you looking at this out, and have a great